Listen, we got a Intel Key Minute we're gonna have on this Good Friday, just before we go into our Far Back Friday segment, where we can play songs that just are funky songs. You know the funk? I forget how James Brown describes and defines funk, but anyway, James Brown said it's a song good to your ears. It's good music. We have with us from Intel Key, Mr. Questwell Ferguson. How are you, Quest?
Hey, Shivago. I'm really glad to be here, and good day, Bahamas.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now, I know you guys have been spending some time polling this country for a little while, trying to get a sense of people's thoughts and thinking on any number of issues. And we don't have any more prevalent issues in the world right now than COVID-19 in the country right now than COVID-19, saving except the extent to which people may be anticipating some election coming up and so forth and so forth. So tell us what's happening. What has Intel Key been finding out in recent times?
All right, great, Shivago. So I'll get right into it. Again, we're really excited to share the findings from our early poll. From our studies and our brief research, we haven't seen any survey conducted and openly shared with a sample size as large as our early poll, with 5,691 completed responses. So with the information that we're showing or we'll be sharing today, this information is weighted. So when we say weighted, that means that we balance the information based on age, gender, party allegiance, and other factors. So for example, in this survey, we had a question: who did you vote for in the 2017 general election, right? We know that the split between the FNM and PLP in the 2017 general election was 57-37, right? So we can see if any group is overrepresented or underrepresented just based off that historical vote or by age, etc. So today, we'll be sharing with you the overall look at the political polling for 2022. We look at that by age and by geography. And when we say geography, we're talking about New Providence versus Grand Bahama versus other family islands. Also, when we look at age, we look at over 45 versus under 45. And to that same issue that you said is first and foremost and primary and affecting so many lives in the Bahamas and around the world, COVID-19. We also did some surveying in terms of people's acceptance of the government's vaccination program. So the information that we're sharing based on the weighting that we've done, we have a level of confidence of 95% and a margin of error of plus or minus 3.5%.
Okay.
So when we say that margin of error, so just to put it in terms that everybody can understand. So presently we have the PLP at 35% of the popular vote and the FNM at 30%, right? So our poll indicates that there's a 5% gap between the FNM favoring the PLP. With that 3.5% margin of error, if we apply that, that means that the gap between the FNM and PLP, based on our polling, can be anywhere from 1.5% or 8.5% in favor of the PLP.
Okay.
All right. So it's also very important to note that Intel Key is a private firm. What we've done, we took and redistributed any of the profits or also the capital from the partners to invest to make sure that we can conduct this poll. This is not based or it was not mobilized by any one of the political parties. We also have controls, right, to make sure that the people that are completing these surveys are residents of the Bahamas and in the Bahamas. And we do that by tracking IP addresses at 2 levels. And then we also have controls to make sure that any unique user that takes the survey can only complete it just once.
So you do all that is necessary to ensure that you have essentially a scientific, credible survey, removing any biases that might jaundice the results you get.
Yes, that's correct. And we do that as much as possible. Again, while people are taking the survey by tracking by IP address. So if we see an IP address of someone taking the survey in China, we essentially register that as junk data, and that is not factored into the end results. And then also for persons that are taking the survey, if you take it on your phone and then you try to take it again, you will see that you're only able to take it. One, it'll restrict you and not allow that person to participate any further.
All right. Well, so tell us what your polling has found today.
All right. Without any further ado. So what our polls are currently showing us is that the PLP has a lead at 35% of the popular vote, with the FNM at 30% of the popular vote. Okay. Now, one thing that's very important to know here is that historically the FNM and PLP represent at minimum, right, about 95 to 96% on average. The only time in modern election history where we saw any change from that 95, 96% rate is in 2012, where the DNA was able to poll at 8.48% of the popular vote, right? And what we see so far with the data that we have been polling is that the DNA and the coalition of independents, Zhivago, quite possibly can get somewhere around that range of 8 to 10% of the popular vote, right? Why we think that's interesting and something that you might remember firsthand is that in the 2012 election, you had constituencies like Bamboo Town, Seabreeze, Garden Hills, and Fort Charlotte, just to name a few, where the amount of the popular vote that the DNA was able to collect was actually greater than the margin between the PLP and the FNM, right? So essentially in that general election in 2012, the third party vote was greater than the difference between the PLP and the FNM. And right now, based on the early poll again, it suggests that the DNA and the coalition of independents quite possibly may be able to gather somewhere between 7 to 10% of the popular vote, which can have a significant impact on a lot of these critical seats that will be important for winning the next general election.
That is a keen observation because, as you indicated, I was front and center in 2012, and that was exactly what happened in Fort Charlotte. The number of votes that was won by the DNA candidate at the time, Mark Humes, was certainly sufficient. if most of it has swung in my direction to change the results, and so that played out in a number of constituencies. So you say you have, and we know that this is a snapshot in time. So people who want to go and be funky about, you saying the FNM will lose, the PLP can win, or vice versa, and so forth. That's not the point. The point is you took a poll, and at that date, the FNM poll at what number you say?
At 30%.
30%.
Yeah, and that's a great point, right? So as we mentioned, we can accept that our margin of error is 3.5%, right? The gap between the FNM and the PLP based on our current poll is 5%. Currently,
5 percentage points for sure, yeah.
Yeah, and the total amount of undecided voters based on our poll is 12%, right? Mm-hmm. So that 12% can very easily be shifted with a split of 2-1 to the FNM. So even based on our poll that we have currently, right? If we look at our margin of error at 3.5%, that means there's only a 1.5% gap between the PLP and the FNM. The party that can connect and engage those undecided voters within the next few weeks or months can very well have a seismic change, right? So if we look at that 12% and we apply that to the FNM at 42% and the PLP remains at 35%, then you have a gap of 7%. So by no means are we saying that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the PLP will win the next general election. Again, the gap is 5%. Our margin of error is 3.5%. We have 12% of the people polling as undecided. And then we have another 11% that say they're just disinterested and don't intend to vote as of right now.
And what is interesting to note is this is of course a national poll. It's not a constituency level poll. So you could have in any given constituency polling that is different than what the broad spectrum of the society is saying.
Yes, Zhivago, that is absolutely correct. And as we continue to see no shifts in the boundaries, I mean, we have some constituencies where the total amount of constituents, the vote is not necessarily 1-to-1, right? So we have some constituencies with 7,000 plus constituents. So you might have a smaller constituency where the FNM rules with the popular vote again. So, I mean, we're looking at popular vote versus seat breakdown, right? And another thing that we thought was very important to look at, Zhivago, when we look at those people that say they're disinterested or do not want to vote, right? Currently, based on our polls, that stands at 11%. Why we think that's interesting, and we've heard some people dismiss this particular tangent or topic or theory or assumption that we've introduced in terms of the amount of Bahamians that are disinterested or just disillusioned voters, right? So how we've been measuring voter participation is based on the people that are registered to vote and turn out to vote. In the 2017 general election, for the first time since 1992, that percentage dropped below 90%. It was at 89%, but it was still something to note. The error that we feel there is that we are not looking at that based on the total size of the eligible voter pool in the Bahamas and those persons that are choosing or opting not to register to vote, right? So we're making that entire 90 percentile decision based on the people that are actively registering to vote. And I can tell you as a younger voter, when I talk to some of my friends and with social listening, I mean, I'm looking at anywhere from 1 out of 8 to 1 out of every 10 of them that have never registered to vote that are over 30 years of age, right? So again, that's just in my conversations in passing. I'm not saying that it's something that's conclusive, and we'll continue to do surveying and polling. We might even move into focus groups to really deep dive on that particular issue or point.
Well, I would have to say that looking at it, these poll results aren't surprising to me and probably reflects my own non-scientific observations of the people with whom I interact. And if these undecideds exist and these disinterested exist, I would have to say that the FNM more than anybody else needs to get out there and try to win them, because quite frankly, historically, undecideds and even in quote disinterested persons, if they go to vote, they break for the opposition more often than not. And so if you're listening to these results and you're either party, both need to go and do their jobs. But if you're the FNM as an incumbent, listening to that, you have a greater risk just based on the historical results we've seen in elections.
Very true. And so to that point, I'll go into segue to look at the under 45 versus over 45 results, right, Zhivago, which we thought were very interesting as well. So when we look at the share of the popular vote that the FNM and PLP get amongst voters under 45, that represents just 57%. With voters 45 and over, the PLP and FNM represent 80%, or 4 out of every 5 voters over the age of 45 are voting between the PLP and FNM. Okay. When we look at it with voters under 45, that number is just 6 out of 10, right? Mm-hmm. Another thing where we see a significant difference, the under 45 voters that we classify as disinterested voters is almost 3 times greater than that for over 45. So over 45 represents just 5%. Under 45 represents 14%, right? Mm-hmm. So again, we see that there's a lot of work to be done through both of the major political parties in terms of engaging and connecting with those younger voters. So when we look at go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, just again, not surprising, eh? Because one of the comments I made on the show several times is that younger voters, millennials in particular, are the first generation of Bahamians in almost 40 years who have lived their entire emergent lives, and they're coming into their own in their late teens and early 20s and so forth, who have lived entirely in that period of time in a non-prospering economy. An economy where they didn't see successive periods of economic growth that yielded them better economic circumstances for themselves.
Yes.
So that disillusionment is concrete. They don't have a party that they can reflect on and say, well, I remember when they brought us good times. I can, because I grew up in a period of time where I'm old enough to have lived under good times under the Progressive Liberal Party and good times under the Free National Movement.
Fair point. And when we look at that, when we talk about the impact of third parties, younger voters are 4 times more likely to vote for a third party or fringe party, however we would choose to classify it, right? So the major takeaways on this particular, when we look at it by age, over 45-year-old Bahamians are 23 points higher in terms of polling for the PLP and FNM. And younger voters are 4 times more likely to vote for the DNA Coalition of Independents or another party, and nearly 3 times more likely to not vote in the upcoming general election.
Okay, I have a text here at this very late hour. Obviously, this person just joined the conversation. I didn't hear you when you said it the first time, so I'm going to give you a chance to say it. Good day, Mr. Lang. I'm interested to know who is funding and financing this organization conducting these polls. Also, can your guest share the poll that reveals the political persuasion of the pollsters?
Okay, so all good questions. Again, Intel Key, these polls are entirely funded by our company. So we invest our own capital or redirect revenue in order to move ahead with these pollings. But again, I mean, technology is quite advanced, right? So we do web-based polling, which allows us to keep our costs down. And there are great solutions, for example, like Alive has MiFi, right? So we can have our people go door to door. They have their MiFis to stay connected, and that gives them the ability to now go door to door and get people to participate in the surveys. Additionally, when you complete our surveys, we have tons of different questions, factors, variables. For example, what was your 2017 vote? In politics today, do you identify as an independent F&M PLP voter? So all of these things are factored in to the ultimate results that we show that are weighted to make sure that our information is as accurate as possible.
And as you said, you weighted it based on last election's results, which were heavily in favor of the FNM, yet you have results that are showing that the FNM is trailing the PLP. So if you want to talk, if you are someone who's trying to get at, oh, maybe they polled a lot of FNMs or PLPs or versus the FNM, et cetera, you're saying that's you get rid of that by structuring the distribution in accordance with the historic vote.
Yes, correct. And also other factors. So for example, when we look at that over 45, under 45, if we see that there's only 20% of the people that are completing the survey over 45, not saying that is the case, but we also see that there's a greater portion of that section of society that's voting for the two major parties. We could then apply weights to the results from the over 45 to make sure that there's balance, right? Unfortunately, the last census that we did was in 2010. So we try to use any anecdotal information or research shared by ministries to help us as we do the weighting.
Did you guys do anything in relation to COVID?
Yes, we did. So we could jump there right now, because I know we only have so much more time, right? So when we look at COVID vaccination acceptance, just 32% of the people that took the survey said that they said yes to their interest in taking the COVID-19 vaccine.
32%.
Yes, 32%. So the other 68% was split between not sure and no. So we have 26% of the persons surveyed that say that they are not sure, right? So when we look at yes or not sure, if we group them together, you're looking at this 26 plus 32, which is 58, right? So roughly just over 58% Bahamians say yes or not sure, and the other 42% say no outright.
Okay. Any surprising results from your survey involving COVID?
Yes. So there was one thing that really popped out, and that was the impact that political allegiance is having on persons' acceptance of taking the COVID-19 vaccination.
Okay.
So what we saw was that F&M voters, 65% of them say yes, they are willing to take the COVID-19 vaccine, while just 23% of the people that say that they are PLPs or intend to vote for the PLP in the 2022 general election say that they are open to taking the COVID-19 vaccination, right? And it's interesting because we see a similar dynamic at play in the United States of America, right? So they have one of the largest economies in the world, one of the most sophisticated education systems, but at the same time, political rhetoric and political bias is having this significant impact on people's acceptance of the COVID-19 vaccination.
So from the polling, if you're F&M, you're more likely to be accepting of vaccination. If you're PLP, you're less.
Yes. And then we also see that there is a relationship between income and level of education and acceptance of the COVID-19 vaccination.
And that, which is the higher your income, the more likely you are to
accept the COVID vaccine.
Okay. Yes. And education.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Yep. Interesting. Anything else you want to share with us?
No. So, I mean, the only other thing that I'd like to share, Shivago, again, if anybody wants to access this information, this dashboard is readily accessible. If you follow Intel Key on Facebook, so www.facebook.com/IntelKey242, you will see a link where you're able to click through and see all of the data that we've discussed today. And we also encourage Bahamians to look out for our final election survey. So we'll have a mix of door-to-door as well as our web-based polling. So when they see those Intel Key shirts and hats, know that they can have trust and confidence that what we're doing is not partial, And again, what we will share is open and transparent because, again, our goal is to close the gap between the political class and the average Bahamian.
Thank you very much. This text says, hi, Mr. Lang, a very intelligent young man. Mr. Ferguson is skilled econometrics and statistics. I trust his polling. However, I think the PLP will still fail miserably at the polls. Well, you're not making any predictions. You're just saying what the polls reflect, eh?
Correct. You got it.
All right. We have another text here. Says, I hope the PM is listening to your show. This is a real fight to retain. The government says that tax. Listen, we'll be hearing from you some more at Intel Key. Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson, for showing up, and thank you for sharing that key information for us.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lang.
All right, man. Take care.
All right.
All right. We have